The presentation today, together with my colleague Juan, will be to provide a brief overview of EFSA's genotoxicity assessment processes with a focus on pesticides, and also provide EFSA's view and the current state of play on quantitative genotoxicity assessment. So, EFSA, which is the European Food Safety Authority, is dealing with a very broad range of substances in terms of chemical risk assessment. And as Franz described before, they can be largely divided in two main categories: contaminants and regulated substances. So contaminants are those substances that are unintentionally present in food or feed. No applicants are involved, and thus no dossier is submitted. And as a result, the test battery from EFSA Scientific Committee, the one that Diane described this morning, cannot be followed. And the risk assessment relies primarily on data from literature. For regulated substances, these are compounds that are intentionally present in food and feed. Applicants are involved, and a dossier is submitted with all the necessary toxicological information. And the test battery from EFSA's Scientific Committee for Genotoxicity testing strategies is followed for most regulated substances, except from the case of pesticides, for which we're going to hear more shortly. There is also the grouping approach that may be followed. It has been applied in some flavoring group evaluations, and also the genotoxicity of mixtures, where the component approach is followed. So, as regards the EFSA's genotoxicity assessment, this is mainly carried out by experts of EFSA's scientific panels or member state competent authorities in the case of pesticides. And of course, these are also following EFSA's guidances and relevant documents for genotoxicity assessment. However, in addition to that, we also have the cross-cutting working group on genotoxicity, which consists of 12 external experts. Diane is our chair there, and myself, with a few other EFSA colleagues, are supporting the work of this working group. And it aims to ensure a harmonized interpretation of EFSA's genotoxicity testing strategies, and it can provide support when different views have been expressed within one panel or between different EFSA panels in a specific genotoxicity assessment. And can also provide scientific advice when equivocal or a complex genotoxicity test results are available. And also, from a direction of the EFSA Scientific Committee, it helps in the development of guidance documents as well that we saw earlier this morning. So here, I would like to mention that EFSA has not applied quantitative genotoxicity assessment, as it's not included in the testing strategies that we have. However, besides annugenicity, that can be thresholded, as we saw this morning, by taking into account all the data that are available on the substance. We have the margin of exposure approach and the TTC, which have been described in detail today. So also, in the interest of time, I'm not going to provide any technical details on those. Just a couple of things I would like to mention here, that the margin of exposure has been used by EFSA, just a couple of examples here, for contaminants and feed flavorings. And also another point I would like to mention is that the margin of exposure approach is due for an update by EFSA Scientific Committee. This will be a major revision. The document that we saw also earlier is from 2005 in the form of an opinion. Now it will be a guidance, so this is a major revision, and the work is expected to start sometime in the second half of this year. And then we have the TTC. For each application, there are specific criteria which substances can be this concept applied and where not. When there is limited substance-specific information. And for DNA reactive mutagens and carcinogens, the threshold is 0.0025 micrograms per kilogram body weight per day. And some examples again on where this has been applied is contaminants, non-intentionally added substances, such as unavoidable impurities in food contact materials, food additives, also in the case of food flavorings, and components in feed additives. And that is from my side, so Juan will continue on pesticides.
Yes, thank you, Alexis. So you have heard already that there are differences with pesticides, and this is similar to the biocides, in the sense that we have the approval criteria, so active substances, safeners, or synergies should be only approved when the substance is not classified as a germ cell mutagen category 1A or 1B. So important for you to know that classification and labeling is up to ECHA for decision making. And also, you have heard by Diane this morning that in the test battery, we are not following precisely the scientific committee opinion of 2011, and in vitro mammalian gene mutation assay is included there in the basic in vitro test battery. And an in vivo study is always required independent if all the in vitro studies are negative. And this is, we are following this because we need to follow the regulation. But of course, there are commonalities in the different sectors, and these commonalities are that the same apical endpoint should be assessed, so gene mutation, clastogenicity, and anagenicity. We assess not only those studies that are required according to the regulation, but also the studies that are available in the literature. And also, as has been mentioned this morning, genotoxicity is per se an endpoint. So in principle, if we have a concern for genotoxicity, this will prevent setting of health-based guideline values unless a threshold is demonstrated. And in the area of pesticide active substances, we have carbendazim as a purely anogenic substance on which health-based guideline values has been set. But we, in the area of EFSA, in the food and feed, we also assess some substances that are found in very low amount. In the absence of experimental data, we use QSAR and read-across approaches for mutagenicity. So we have some examples here, like, for example, pesticide transformation products. These are what we call in our area in Europe metabolites, and also for impurities, in the case that we don't have experimental data, we are using these QSARs. We are also in other regulatory remits in EFSA. It has been used also for components in mixtures, like in smoke flavorings. Has been used in the compendium of botanicals, also in flavoring group evaluations, and in contaminants, for example, with nitrosamines. So then, coming to the last slide from our side, we would like to summarize these main challenges. So, until now, EFSA has not applied a quantitative analysis of the assessment of gene mutation and clastogenicity of substances present in food and feed. However, a health-based guideline value can be established for substances that are anogenic, but not clastogenic nor causing gene mutations. EFSA recognized that there are currently no intentionally accepted guidelines for quantitative genotoxicity assessment, but development of such guideline will require discussion between relevant experts and other stakeholders in order to reach consensus, and this symposium is a clear example of a starting point to go into this direction. But of course, we also need to take into account that in the regulatory remit, such approach will also need to take into account any legislative restriction in the different sectors we are dealing with. And on the last point, yes, EFSA is very active on genotoxicity, and we are periodically updating our guidance documents, and new methodologies and approaches will be considered, as, for example, Alexis already mentioned, the margin of exposure approach will be subject to a revision. And of course, the guidance from 2011 might need also further revision, so the genotoxicity testing strategies. So thank you very much for your attention.